All right. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of the Stories of Selling Human podcast. I'm your host, Alex Smith, and I started this podcast because I believe everyone in the world will someday be faced with a situation, could be business, could be personal, that requires you to create change. I think we all want to be heard, seen, and understood, but the people who get our attention and convince, persuade, or influence us aren't just salespeople. There are great humans throughout all walks of life that we're drawn to. I'm going to share their stories here so that we can tap into what makes us human, practice our human skills, and ultimately we'll all become better at selling by being human. All right, gang, I am super excited to bring this person on. I feel like she is so much about what this podcast stands for. I met her on Clubhouse, and she has a new book out that speaks so much to what this podcast is about. She's an author of the new book, How Good Humans Sell. She's been teaching B2B salespeople how to sell without the sleaze or the cheese. She owns her own corporate sales training business. She's a speaker, entrepreneur. She specializes in high tech and high end professional services. She's also on Clubhouse at Catherine Brown. Please welcome none other than Catherine Brown to the podcast. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you, Alex. You know that when I met you on Clubhouse, we just both keyed in on this human word, right? And my radar went up and I was like, this is a person I have to meet. And so I'm so glad we were connected through some mutual friends.
Absolutely. I'm so excited. I heard just a podcast that you were on, and you said something that really resonated with me. And, it's funny, like I'm always thinking about kind of, the term like falling into sales. You described yourself kind of falling into it. I fell into it myself, being in I was in PR and I wanted to be in corporate communications. And you said, you were like, you wanted to be a musician, you were in band, and that was like your trajectory. But it just wasn't like you didn't have the like just dedication or the hours to put into practicing the instrument to really get into one of those final chairs and make a career out of it. But being a technical recruiter in sales was something that like felt fun to you. So I'm curious to ask you a question about what was fun about sales, because I feel like we're all selling. It's just that salespeople, they're only ones that would like just care to admit it, and they've made a career out of it. And you actually not only made a career out of it, but you're teaching people a way to sell that feels more like them, that's more human. And so my question to you is, what was fun to you about that career path, and what continues to be fun about it today?
Okay, thank you so much. That's a great question. So the music path, I realized by the time I got to about age 20 that it was actually going to the festivals and being one of many in the orchestra and the travel around that was my favorite part. And what I realized was that I was lonely practicing as many hours in practice room as it would take. And I was starting to kind of bribe myself. Like I would say to myself, okay, when you get these excerpts right, then you'll go meet your friends at the coffee house. When you do this, I had these little games and incentives with myself. And I would hear that other people would just get lost in the music and hours would rush by. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I never feel that way. And I think it's probably for me somewhat about introversion and extroversion, because I do get energy from people. But it's funny that I would then go to a technical recruiting position and say that was fun. I get that that's ironic because some people wouldn't think that was fun and that it wasn't a big change or big step over. But for me, what recruiting provided and what then going from that kind of selling to other kinds of selling provided for me was I mastered a framework of this is how I generally run the interviews. This is how I run the call. I could memorize that. I could learn the terminology about the tech stuff. You just have to learn it, right? But the people all changed. Their needs, their goals, every person was different. And so meeting copious numbers of people over the years and seeing similarities in people, differences in people, and just having a wide network, that part of connecting was true from the very first job out of college. And
Yeah.
it's been true for everything I've done since then. And even my volunteering. My volunteering will often be, hey, I'm going to this banquet. Don't you want to come too? Or I'm going to buy a table for this. Who can I invite who would think this cause was special? And I'm assembling people. And so it's that connecting part, that's the human to human connecting part, that I think 22 years old, right out of college, I didn't have the words for it that you and I have now,
Yeah.
but I think that's what was happening, is that even though we were talking tech stuff and they were programmers, they're people, and we were connecting on that people to people level in a way that you don't do in the practice room. The practice room is a solitary, beautiful, but solitary experience. And I didn't want as much of that.
Yeah. I'm so glad, I love that answer, because a lot of people think that people all want to be in sales because it's uncapped potential. Like, my performance dictates my worth. I get to make as much money as I want. People are, or watching people driving great cars, and I wanted that lifestyle. And it was like, it's all inward focus, as opposed to what you were talking about. It's like, I get energy from other people, and like the possibilities that every person might give to me, right? So like, they're not looking at as focused, like, I'm trying to win over this one moment. It's like you have this like infinite mindset, where it could be, it's more about like the connection, like you said. And one person could lead to another, that may, through that's what got you energy. And through doing those things, you've probably got sales that you weren't really intending maybe to necessarily make, but they generated themselves organically because of those activities, it seems like.
Yes, and then people follow you company to
Yeah.
company.
Yeah.
They want to know what else you're working on, and you can have relationships resurface after 10 years,
Yeah.
or or things like that. So I think the other thing that I've seen happen that is less true when you're first starting in sales, but it's something a person can aspire to and practice to get to, is that the more you think of selling as helping other people make the connections they need, sometimes the solution is what I offer. But as many times, like if I have an inbound lead or I get a referral from someone, I would say half the time it's a great lead for me, and half the time it actually ends up being a referral outward. And I have the tools to figure that out really quick and qualify in and qualify out. But if I qualify out, I always send them on their way for these awesome connections, because it's part of what has now become a pretty vast network. And I didn't have that when I was 23, but I do have that now. And so any kind of marketing thing a person could want, any kind of coaching thing a person could want, any kind of chief revenue officer or sales enablement thing a person could want, I probably know somebody who can help them. So if I'm not right the right next thing, someone else is. And that connector part goes all the way back to that very first job in recruiting, in being a tool and a resource for other people. That's very gratifying as part of the profession to me.
Yeah. I want to, before we get into kind of what you do, because I want to definitely dive into like how you coach people, and how like your brand of selling, and some tactics, principles and tactics. Before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about the person you are, and maybe before you even got into that, and like it, one of the things you wrote in your book is, I was just nodding my head the whole time, and at the very beginning you said, sales is a way one human can demonstrate to another that they care. And I was like, man, that like it's so profound, so simple but profound. And I'm wondering, like, in your personal life, like, if you really looked back, maybe you really didn't think of it back then, like before, maybe in the, I think music, in a lot of ways, is connecting with your audience and showing people that you care about, kind of like the emotions in the room, and
Mhm.
like how they're reacting. And maybe even before that, in your personal life, were there things that you, maybe now looking back, like things that you did that were demonstrating to people that you were caring, but you never didn't really view them as sales back
Mhm.
then, but maybe in a way, through the lens of caring, people were drawn to you because of that approach?
Mhm. Yes, I think So this theme of care just makes me think of a few other words to see if this line of thinking makes sense. I think that one of the things that one of the things that music provides is it trains you to recognize beauty. It trains you to have an ear for it and to connect in community with other people around it. And um, in fact, when I was dating my husband I met in college and married right out of college, literally the week after I graduated, which no one should ever do because that was crazy. It was so stressful. It seemed like a good idea at the time. We were engaged to be married and having a conversation one night, and I said, okay, I know this is crazy, we don't even know if we'll have kids or if we'll have trouble getting pregnant, what this would look like, but my future children must have music lessons. And he said, okay, because he kind of did the obligatory 4 years of piano, but he said, why is that? And I said, I think it's a privilege. It's certainly a position of privilege. And I know that not everyone can do it, but it cultivates you. It gives you a framework and literally scales and theory and all of these ways of connecting with other people around beauty. And it doesn't have to be classical music. I mean, mine happened to be, but think about how all of this is. What is sales? You have a framework, and once you memorize the framework, you can riff off the framework, right?
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
play with others.
Yeah.
When you learn to sell, people who are amazing at selling, I guarantee you, and you've interviewed them, as you drill in, they've got 3, 4, 5 steps. They always do, and it may sound different each time, but in the back of their mind, it's like the frame of a house. It's like there's a frame there, and how I decorate the room and what it looks like is different each time, but I always stick with a frame because that's how I have success as they go through a process. I think that I think lots of things are like that.
Yeah.
Does that answer it?
Yeah, no, I love that because, yeah, like structure of music, like you have the basics down. You talked about like how we learn things, like you have a baseline of learning how your kids like in school learn. They have like a baseline of their arithmetic, and then you build off of that. You don't just try to like, a lot of people like view sales as so daunting. It's like they use these limiting words like, I need to go get coaching, or I just got to do this, or maybe just if I do this, and
I
like
should have
I
done
know I
it.
should have done this. I need to, I'm a business owner. I feel like I should go get some sales coaching, but like they don't like recognize the things that maybe they're already doing in that framework, and like just focusing on that, keeping it simple of that, and then just focusing on like at the end of the day, what is the intention, the outcome. Like you said, I've heard you say this isn't rocket science. It's very, people complicate it more than it has to be. If you're only thinking about that other person, how do I make this person's life better? How am I really caring about this individual? The product, like the knowledge, as you say in the book, also is less important than someone believing that you're putting their interests even over your own.
That
Um,
I say that they're like the technical mastery of what you
yeah,
sell.
yeah, yeah,
That mastery is not as important. The perfect answers are not as important for the seller as that the prospect feel
yeah,
if you
yeah,
were for
yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
And I think that when I'm saying it's not rocket science too, what I mean is that there are, think of all the sales training systems that are out there. There's so many wonderful brands. They all come down to a series of steps. So basically people have different words for a series of steps, but once you have those, we'll mix our metaphors and we'll say, once you have those puzzle pieces and you have them generally in place, you have freedom to move around those. And that's what I like people, I want to break it down and make it easy for them to understand. They probably do have pieces of it already, and they may just have one missing piece. It may not be that complicated to get them on track.
yeah. So, let's talk a little bit about, how you coach, and just kind of how your approach um, may, some people may think it's like a new approach to sales. I don't. I think it's always been, we've always, humans have always been involved in sales, even from the earliest days of, cavemen to cavemen and women, selling.
Right.
It's been human beings, like our brains, our hearts. It's all been a part of it in the beginning, but somewhere along the way, it became about just exchanging money for value, and that's still a part of it. But you can't ignore that humanity, that emotion around it, our mindsets, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
So yeah, talk a little bit about it. Like you launched this book. Tell me why you think that something was so necessary to put out into the world, with like such a great title, by the way.
Thank you.
How Good Humans Sell.
Mhm.
Um, why was it necessary, and why was it so important for you to write it? And maybe a third follow-up: who in your life inspired you to write it? What human beings did you witness were doing these things that you write about in the book?
All right. Thank you. So I think that over the years, I'll give you a couple buckets of thought. These are gross generalizations, but they're helpful to make an illustration, I think. There are people who think of sales categorically as a system of steps to convince. And then there are people who think of sales as a step of discovery that results in asking them to buy. And you see the difference there, right? So I'm not saying everyone who teaches on this is all one way or the other, because there's this middle ground in the middle. But in general, I think there's a lot out there about convincing, and it gets into how you negotiate and who goes first and who does these things. And I'm sure there's things I can learn in those categories. I don't purport to know all of that, but I am not in the convince camp. I don't like that, because I don't like when I'm on the receiving end of that and my hackles go up. And I'm very nice to salespeople, Alex, because I mean, I write back to everyone who solicits me, because I did as a cold caller for so many years that I feel sorry for people. And I will always write back, even if it's just to say, this isn't a priority. I can't foresee this becoming a priority. So, you can take me off your list if you want, or check back in a year. I mean, I literally coach people who solicit me, because I understand that that's a tough job. But I'm not in the convinced camp. I'm in another camp. And I felt like, to your question, why now, or what is unique about it? I feel like there's so much that we actually know from social science research. And before you and I started recording, we were talking about Carol Dweck and Malcolm Gladwell, and there's all kinds of people in the behavioral economics space that have done this amazing research, or like Malcolm Gladwell, he compiles other people's amazing research and puts it in a readable format. There's all these things we know about why we do what we do as humans. And I didn't feel like very much of that was addressed in selling. So it's not that I do have a little bit of original research in the book, where I did some of my own data about people's attitudes about sales. I wanted there to be some of my own research, but it really didn't set out saying I'm going to be a lifelong researcher about this, like Brene Brown is about her topics, right? That wasn't really my goal. I wanted to test my theory, but it also aggregate great classic social science research that says what is going on here and here when you're selling that we already know, because you are a human being. You show up like this in your personal life, and this research shows this in other ways. How does the research inform how we are behaving while we're selling, and what can I bring to that? So bringing in those elements about how and why people do what they do, I didn't see much of that. So I'm very interested in being corrected on that and learning if there's more, but I haven't seen much about that being applied to selling. And that feels like such a missed opportunity to me, because if there's all this research, for example, on, we know the term cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance has been used in all these other ways, but not about sales, right? Confirmation bias. I will see whatever I think I'm going to see. In fact, I go look for it subconsciously. That's what confirmation bias says. Well, we know it's been applied in all these other ways. Why not to sales?
Yeah. I agree. I mean, there's so much. I mean, that like sales is psychology. It's trying to get in someone's head and in their heart a bit, and asking the right questions to try to help people and lock it in themselves. A lot of people don't even realize what they're doing, what they really want. Like a lot of times that's what they tell you they need or want, isn't really the real root. I feel like the best salespeople are always looking for the real root behind the need and what's really driving this sale here, and they're just constantly hunting for it. They don't take anything at face value. You write. Let's talk about maybe about tactics, because you write a little bit about like people are making decisions. I think you got from a colleague was MVP: motives, values, power list. I love that.
Right. Yeah, I made up that term.
Or you
Yeah.
made it, or you coined the term. So sorry. So you coined the term. And so it's based on human needs: status, security, comfort. Like people are always thinking, like you're always trying to. And I've been in sales trainings too. I've been in you would like this. I've been in a sales training once. It was I'll throw them a shout out to Corporate Visions. And this trainer said, like, anytime you use the word like we want to help you, or our goal, or I'm going to, or we will, you have to wear this cape. And our goal is not to be the hero of the story and to like be the superhero for the client to save them. It's to be the guide and make your client the hero of the story, and to ask questions. Really, you're the Yoda. You're the like every good movie is based on this like hero story. So
you're Dumbledore.
Yeah, Dumbledore. Yeah, I love it. Like, yeah, I love how you talk about that in the book. So tell me like some of the tactics you coach salespeople on, and really helping people be that guide and unlock these like like sometimes these hard human needs that people aren't necessarily willing to just offer up when they first meet you.
That's right. So on the MVP list, quick summary about that is saying that I'm saying it's like a Venn diagram. So think of 3 circles that overlap. And I'm saying most of a very significant percent of their buying decision is, let's just say 50-50. It's different for each person. Let's say 50-50. Say 50% of their decision is actually about the product or service you sell. It's making sure it checks the box.
Yep.
Does this thing work? Does it accomplish the functionality I need? Are they who they say they are, etc.? The other part, let's say 50%, I don't really know, it's a guess, right? But let's say the other 50% is the MVP list. And that's things like the status, the security, and the comfort that this buying decision gives me. This is what I think people mean when they say people buy emotionally and they justify rationally. I don't like that expression, because I think that to the person who's the buyer, it could be perceived as manipulative, and I don't think it's meant that way. But I agree with the sentiment about the fact that emotions drive so much more than people realize themselves as the buyer. Like if I'm the buyer, I am not always in tune with the fact that I am thinking subconsciously. Sometimes I'm thinking, is this going to help me be promoted, or is this going to be a threat to me? Is this going to make me look good, or is this not? Is this literally going to feel good? Might be a luxury good, right? How is this going to feel? How will I appear? All of those things are MVP, motives and values, power list kind of items. So because we don't always know really what we want, the way I teach people to be a guide in that sales process, and what your listeners can take from this call, is number one, we never act in a condescending way, because that wouldn't be a good human thing to do, but we are suspicious about whether the person who is declaring what they want actually really wants the thing they want. And I'm just saying that because I don't think humans in general always have an accurate sense. Literally, Alex, just this week, I went back to a person I've bought lots of things from in the past for my company. And I said, would you give me a quote for this thing? And then I got the thing. They gave me exactly what I asked for, and I got it. And when I opened it and really stared at it and thought about my next steps, I thought, well, this isn't the thing I need at all. They didn't do anything wrong as a seller. It just would have been even better if they said, hey, I'll give this to you if you're ready. But what would be really awesome would be for me to understand your goal for this thing, so I can make sure it's actually going to give you what you want. So now, because they fulfilled what I asked, I'm going to pay them, but I still have to go have a conversation, talk about my goals, because really we should have talked about my goals to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah. People
And,
are,
and I get rushed, and I'm not blaming or, being ugly about that. I just think I teach on this, and I didn't slow down long enough to think, self, what is it that you really want? And walk myself through a process. So I wasn't a great communicator. They didn't ask good questions. I didn't end up with what I need. And now I'm back to the drawing board and I have to look again.
yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's so much better when you're focusing on just making anything easy for people, whether it leads to you or not. It's just like you said, with what you did, you're getting at like, tell me like what you're going to use that for, or like how is that going to help you, or
I will help you to
you
what
know
end,
yeah,
right?
to
So
what end, what
to what
will
end?
life be? Yeah, I like that. I'm going to steal
To
that
what
from you. To what
because
end?
everyone is on, I like that part about the hero's journey metaphor, the idea that there is an ultimate transformation that our hero is trying to experience. If the hero is the prospect, they're marching along in their life, and you have an opportunity to come in and say, for this season, for this opportunity, for this thing, maybe I can help you. And you ask questions around that, you decide if that's true, and you send them on their way. I mean, you are a meaningful relationship for a season, as long as that makes sense and when it makes sense. And that's the way that it's about them and not about you. So one of the takeaways that your listeners could take is that, number one, we've already said people don't always know what they want, so don't assume. Ask a lot of questions around whether that's true. And Alex, I always start with some version of a goal question on a discovery call. It might be, would you tell me what you've tried up until now? Or it might be, I hear you got my name from so and so. Can you tell me a little bit about your project? But it's a broad question because I'm listening for MVP things. Because once you train yourself to hear, you'll hear
Yeah.
status, security, comfort. You'll hear hints about it that tell you what is important to that person. But we can't assume that a person's completely dialed in, that the buyer is completely dialed in on what they want, because that would assume they have all the information they could possibly have to make the decision. And who has that?
Yeah. I
I
and I
don't.
would I don't either. And I love how you like some of those, like for everybody listening, some of those things that she calls out, and you're gonna have a link to this in the book, but she calls out like things that you can listen for when people are like asking, like she used it like a construction manager story and like with a drill bit, and when they ask about like, how do you monitor these bits, like they're thinking of like, ooh, like what if these bits break? Then we're talking about like, we're not talking about the product, we're talking about like all the implications, like the costs, the hassle, all that, like and they
The
want to
chain
know like,
reaction.
how do you prevent that from
Mhm.
happening? So then they're right locked in. So you're just kind of keeping your eye when you're asking, like recognizing, okay, this person's going to a motive here, like like they're going to like something that's important. There's like their status, like being safe. People want to move towards feeling of comfort, or feeling of like mitigating risk, all of that thing. So like listen for those things, right?
Right. And what I'm saying is, we're all driven by those things all the time anyway, just as humans. And focusing on how I understand what's important to those people, because some people are more prevention oriented. If you're selling to my husband, he could have been a bridge engineer. He ended up as a statistician instead, right? But he is very prevention oriented. So he wants to know, is this going to prevent harm? That's literally how he will think. Are they safe? Is this warranted? How can I check their credentials? Right? Like, he's wired that way. Other people not wired as much toward that way. But see all this work that we're giving to thinking about what's important to the prospect.
Mm.
That is not presenting about yourself the whole time. That's one of the things it means to be a guide, is to not present about yourself the whole time. And number two, you're not convincing. You're asking, and then you're saying, now I heard you say this, and
Mm-hmm.
you say it back. And then you are thinking through, is what I sell at this moment a fit? Part of what else I think is a little bit unique about this guide idea and the way I like to teach selling compared to some of the training that I went through as a sales
Hmm.
employee years ago
Hmm.
is that I also think that when you focus on questions like this, the issue of timing and urgency comes up, and you don't have to be afraid if the answer is this is awesome, but not right now.
Totally. Yeah.
And I think what happens is this is a much larger conversation we can have over dinner sometime. But I think that because people are so commission focused and driven, and I think it's wonderful that salespeople can make a lot of money, and I want to make a lot of money. Like that's not bad. I'm not saying that, but I think that when we're so numbers driven like this, and we don't have all the right incentives to do the right thing, sometimes the right thing is to kick them back to marketing because they are actually the right buyer title. It's just not the right time. And so we have to have a way to continue to serve them through marketing where we continue to add value, we create curiosity, we build trust, we build a relationship, and we come back around at the right time and not be afraid. I don't want to be afraid of it not being yet, because if I do the right thing and I'm talking to enough people, I will have a full pipeline, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think you talked about so much there. I don't want to let you, get away without talking about like mindset. And, you kind of hinted on that there, like what you're thinking about, like a long-term relationship. You're always thinking about just like, how are you serving? What is like a no now isn't a no forever. And, like ghosting now doesn't mean they hate you. We're always telling ourselves these things. And you write so well about how that like affects selling our mindset. You said even something like we all want our lives to have meaning, and meaning, I love that, meaning produces well-being. So I wanted to like maybe have you tell me what you meant by that, and then also just like how we have this sometimes versus like you talked about Carol Dweck, and she writes a lot about in psychology a fixed and growth mindset, like maybe about like, for me, I took a lot away from catching ourselves, because we're all in these mindsets sometimes where we just
Mhm.
limit ourselves so much. So maybe those two things, talk a little bit about like how we should identify when we're in these states, and then also maybe what you meant by that, where like well-being, we
Okay.
want our lives to have meaning.
Okay. Great. So years ago, I probably would have laughed about this term because I had this whole category of thought over here that felt very anti-intellectual to me. And it felt like if I love social science and I can rattle off all the social scientists' names, that probably says something about my interests, right? And so there's this other whole line of self-improvement and writing and speakers and teachers that would talk about mindset, especially about terms like having abundance mindset or having a scarcity mindset. And anything about with the term abundance mindset would set off this flashing yellow light, and I would think hokey, 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 or silly, silly, silly. Or it just was. I was not very open at the time. I had a fixed mindset about what I could learn from those speakers and teachers. And one of the things that I have grown in over the years that I now look for opportunities to impart to other people is when we're selling, if we have a long view in that relationship and we think about being the right thing at the right season for someone, and if we're not, being a vehicle, being a tool, being a resource to send them on their way to what is the right next thing, they will come back, right? It'll come back around. You can have this crazy reciprocity number of just abundant relationships of people who help each other when we always do what's the right thing for someone. And so every time I catch myself in a mindset that's unhelpful about selling, it comes back, Alex, to scarcity. It comes back to not enough leads, worried about not enough revenue, worried about not enough activities in a day or not enough hours in a day. And I hate when I do that. And I can sense it 100 miles away in someone else. It's just scarcity, scarcity, scarcity. Whereas having a long-term view, always doing the right thing, being a good human, being a good person, and thinking about what is added value in this person's life at this moment, I can't tell you how many times I've done coaching calls with people where they're talking about, I'll give you a great example. This isn't in the book. So I have a client that sells to officers in banks. And this client told me about how a C-level executive in the bank that they wanted to sell to shared at lunch, shared some personal stuff going on in her life. She didn't have to. She just, I think she was just cracking the door up a little bit and they were small talking and she's saying, I'm kind of having a hard time. Here's some things going on. Well, I hear that and I think, oh my gosh, what a privileged position. This person who's not bought from you yet has told you some things they did not have to tell you. And this is to be treated with so much care. And also, as importantly, from the perspective of my client who's the seller, I wanted him to recognize that and recognize I haven't sold anything yet, but they wouldn't have told me those things if they didn't like me and trust me. So I'm making major progress here on this relationship, right? Even again, long view, think about the next right thing. So we were getting to year end and I was talking to my client about some accounts that he was trying to crack open. And he referenced this one and he told me a little bit about that conversation. Again, not, nothing too confidential or anything, but gave me a peek about in our one-on-one about how this prospect had shared some things with him. And the things that she shared could have, and really with more practice for my client, ought to prompt a series of actions where you start thinking, what is additional value to this person in their life at this moment based on what they've shared with me? Well, it's not for me to ask them yet to buy. Like, you now have privileged information about something that's going on with this person personally, and you know that that would actually be inappropriate to press them in light of what they've shared with you. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't care that it was year end. This is an industry where they would be a relationship they could buy from him for years and years. I'm not exaggerating because it's a recurring thing. And so what is one quarter compared to doing ultimately what is the more thoughtful thing to do, right? So my coaching was, I really think you want to reference that you recognize she shared privileged information with you and personal information, and say how much you appreciate the time you had together, and you need to send something for the holidays and you need to call back later. I mean, I was like, don't ask. And that sounds so crazy for a sales trainer, but the MVP side of all of that, there's all this personal stuff that informed how to have a long view. And if you have an abundance mentality and you don't have a scarcity mentality and you have that right perspective, is that making sense? Like then you totally directs different steps, totally makes you a different kind of human who's selling, I think.
I'll end off on this and then I'm going to ask you one last question. So you're making me think, like I've shared a version of this story for people listening, but I just recently I can even celebrate this because this month this sale closed, and I have a client who started out months probably in February, where client came in and kind of an entry like a first HR person, first level, like vetting a bunch of companies. I sell learning management software and learning strategy software, and so she vetting a bunch of tools. And long story short, we had a couple demos and things just stalled. We'd sent her some kind of information back and things just stalled. But she asked such great questions, and again, we made it all about her. We didn't bring slides and present at her, and she had noted that like we didn't really focus on us or talking about us, that we were all asking her questions the whole time about her. And then somewhere across the lane, we had a personal conversation about my father, who last year had, just had some hard things that happened to my dad. He had leukemia, and just really tough, because she had mentioned something about being out because of her mom and hospice. And I asked, who, I know you were out, who was it? I know. And then she just, felt comfortable talking to me. And we had this conversation about our parents. Deal went dark, and I just threw something out there like, hey, I want to know who I can, it seems like this isn't the right time. I want to know, you asked such great questions. I want to know who I can, give you a recommendation to. Who's your boss? Who can I give a letter to give you a nice shout out? Because whether or not it's time to buy, I just want to let you know, you may think that it's not necessary, but I think it is. And she, oh my gosh, you don't have to do that. She didn't even tell me who it was. She just said, oh my gosh, it's not the right time now. I just love talking to you. You're good people, Alex Smith. And she actually, that it's a marble. I need to, take that email and save it. And so I didn't hear from her for like a week. And then out of the blue on the weekend, hey, Alex, this is so-and-so you've been working with XYZ. I'd like to have a call. And that was the start. And that was her boss. And that turned into introduce me to a whole suite of people. And months later, it closed. So, it's like those, that separates yourself. People like want to buy from people, again, that are real, that are human.
That's right. Now, this is interesting because I have a friend who is a fellow trainer. I won't name him, but I have a friend who's a fellow trainer, and we have an active dispute about this because he says people don't have to like you, but they do have to trust you. I think they have to like you. You don't have to be best friends, but I think those go together. And it's one of those expressions, like people say, always be closing, or people buy emotionally, but people, buy emotionally, justify rationally. We have these expressions that we say, but I don't repeat all of those expressions. I think we want to pause, notice, and say, do I really think that? And I think they have to like you.
Yeah. And I think like people get it confused because, again, it is value. Your product has to help them, and there has to be some give that it's not like one or the other. You do things simultaneously, right? Like you're always thinking about the person, and through caring about the person, through your like knowledge on your product, through communicating the value, through focusing on them, and like picking up those little like leaves that they put out there, those little strings that they pull out there, and they feel listened to, they feel, again, in the beginning, gang, seen, heard, and understood. That creates people that like working with you. And yes, like people might buy something from somebody because it's like an awesome product, right? Like, but if the salesperson's terrible, they won't do it with a smile on their face. They'll feel like it was just like a necessary evil. And in my opinion, you want to be like liked, and you want it to be somebody that's like valued and trusted, and all those go together. But like, it's so much more powerful because I think likability can overcome maybe like some product deficiencies, like
yes,
if it's something that they really believe, like you're gonna help them overcome those because you care about them more than you do yourself.
Well, this is interesting. I haven't ever drawn an equation about this, but I'm listening to you, Alex, and I'm thinking it'd be interesting. We could figure out what the graphic looked like of saying, I could have a mediocre product and be liked, and that results in a sale. And I could have a really amazing product and not be liked, and that would result in a sale. But what ultimately gets more sales and more good referrals?
Yeah, I have a quadrant. I'm going to share it. I have a quick 5-minute talk on this that's going to go beyond this conversation.
Awesome.
And I'm going to share it with the listeners. But yeah, like it's like the top right is, liked and trusted and is everything, and like necessary evil. People might buy, but you're not going to get the like long-term referral, and then you have like not liked, terrible product, and of course not. And then like another quadrant that's like,
yes,
like that's kind of like a maybe, and you're not sure if you're going to buy or not. But
we hold your nose to deal with someone because you have to get that thing.
Yeah, and
that's that person, right? That's not a good situation. So I agree. I wouldn't want people to think in our good humans discussion that we're saying there's not a product detailed discussion about that. And it might sound like what I'm discussing just takes forever. It doesn't. I mean, I typically have a 20-minute discovery call. I quote basic price so that we have a sense of whether they can afford it or not. I don't ask what's your budget. That's a whole other conversation, but I don't want another budget because I think people pay for things and they find money for things they think are important. So I don't ask budget. I say things like this start at X. That's how I handle it. So they know whether they want to keep talking. And my goal in the discovery call is understanding urgency of timing, because I want to know if it's a marketing lead or a sales lead. If I have I've quoted the basic price, I have a little bit of understanding of what they want to do, and we have, and we've talked about whether it's sales or marketing lead. Then we schedule the next call, and that next one is probably an hour. And I might close at the end of that, or there may be one more, and I might close at the end of that. Like, I'm not talking about 10 hours of conversations. Bigger deals, sure, more steps. But what you and I are talking about here, about creating some relationship, taking an interest, listening for the MVP stuff, it's happening all in the midst of that 20-minute call and then 1 hour call. This is not a 10-hour experience. Now, you might become friends and you might have some emailing and follow each other on social and have some other interactions in a real relationship. But in terms of the sales cycle, it takes like this much longer to have it be that much deeper.
Yeah. And I'll just say, when you're doing those things, like, people are more engaged. They're more apt to tell you things that they weren't. They're more apt to like ask you questions that go to those motives and, those reasons why that they want to buy. They're more in the conversation when you're doing those things. So Catherine, I could talk to you for so long. I know you've got to run. Before you do, I always ask my guests a really fun question about the human that they are. Fun story about you, because I feel like these stories connect us, and it's like, it's just us. Like, no one in the world is like us. So it is a fun question, and it is this. And if I asked your husband, your kids, what is something that is just only one human in the world can do? So what is something or some event, something that happened to Catherine that would only and could only happen to Catherine Brown? What would that one thing be that is just so totally Catherine?
What is something that could happen to me that is
Yeah.
so totally
Yeah.
Catherine?
Or something that you would do, maybe something that,
Uh,
like, your husband's like, you know what? Oh my gosh, you told me that. That is only one person, and that is something that is
I'm
Catherine.
laughing because I don't do it in professional situations, but I have the most ridiculous cackle you've ever heard. It is so loud and so contagious and ridiculous. So it only comes out at the funniest movies or a fit of giggles. Like, it doesn't happen very often. In fact, I have a college friend that I've known for 20 plus years, and we were on a women's retreat together, and we were we were all hanging out in the hot tub, and we started laughing about something, and I got into a full range cackle. And my friend of 20 years was pointing at me, and she said, I have never heard that in my life. And I have lots of small laughs like that, but I'm talking, I don't even want you to hear it. I mean, it's so ridiculous. And my people love it because it is like the height of happiness, and it's saved for special occasions.
All right. Well, someday we're gonna have to hear it at some point. I don't have a good Texas sized joke for you, but until then, for all of our listeners that might not be able to hear it now, but where can they find you and maybe hear it at some point on a Zoom call, or like in a LinkedIn video? Maybe where can they
Yes,
find you?
I will think about where they could hear the cackle for sure. But for everything you'd like to learn about how to get on my regular email communication or courses or things about the book, everything is at my company website, which is extra bold, EXTRABOLD sales.com, extraboldsales.com.
Awesome. All right. Go there, get the book. You're going to have it in the show notes. And maybe, I know you'll learn something. I don't know if you'll hear any cackles, but speaking from someone who's read it, you'll learn a ton. Catherine Brown, thank you so much for being on the
Thank you.
podcast.
Thank you, Alex. Talk to you again.
All right.
Bye-bye.